This video is brought to you by ThermoPro and their Lightning Instant Read Thermometer. Sam Jones is a legend. You and I know him as the face of Eastern North Carolina barbecue, as the master of whole hog barbecue. But that's not what he set out to be.
No, I worked in there as a child, and then I hated it, especially in my early teens. I felt like I was in a prison.
Sam's journey, which started right here at the Skylight Inn, the self-proclaimed capital of North Carolina barbecue, has been met with challenges and opportunity.
So we went with hardly no sales. And I say no sales, we were able to pay our bills, but the gravy just wasn't there.
With obligation and responsibility.
I don't know if it was much of a decision, to be honest with you. It was almost like this is what has to take place.
And an undeniable pride and an irresistible passion in everything that he does.
He's always had that work ethic, just like Daddy did. You didn't never start something you don't finish. You finish it right now.
I've known Samuel all his life. The only thing I question is if he's trying to do too much.
I always just looked at Samuel as if he made a decision to do it, it's probably a good decision.
Everything it is, the way they cook barbecue is the way it was cooked way back, and he's carrying on that tradition. So to me, that would make him president or CEO of the barbecue community in North Carolina.
I think you're going to enjoy this firsthand account of this epic story from Sam and an impressive cast of characters, while Sam cooks a whole hog for us on a pit with quite a bit of history itself.
Got lucky, got a publishing contract to write a book some years ago, and Daniel Vaughn with Texas Monthly was here. He helped me with the book, and we were literally going to the family cemetery, which is 400 yards from where we sit.
Right.
And this house and property was in pretty bad shape, and we just pulled in. I was like, this is where that gentleman lived and my great aunt. And we just pulled in here, started pillaging around a little bit, and I have a picture that hangs in our restaurant somewhere around 1930 that a guy sent to me. And my grandfather was passed at the time, but I managed to figure out who it was, and I got my telephone out and went scrolling to find that picture, and I turned around and looked at him. I said, man, I think this is that pit. And sure enough, it was still in the family, this property, because for years and years, I didn't know it was still in existence. I had always heard, my uncle Emmett, and this is my grandfather talking, it's who taught me how to cook whole hog.
In here, there's a hot pit in there where we put fire in and heated the water, and we put the pigs in it and get all the hair off of them. Then we would hang them, and there was a weight scale right in there that we would weigh them. And there's probably still writing on the wall where they figured up, and then we would butcher it. And that's where when we were just cooking one pig or something and we had a family thing, that's what we did.
So sun's coming up. We've been here for a couple of hours. Got out here early. We showed up at 4 o'clock in the morning. You got your burn barrel started. And is that typical? First thing you're starting is getting the burn barrel, making coals?
Yep, even at the restaurants, you're firing the chimneys up, because it's going to take anywhere from 45 minutes to an hour for it to start producing coals.
So this was Emmett's pit, and so this is where Pete, your grandfather, learned to do whole hog, was in this pit.
That's correct.
Wow. It's kind of tingly to be sitting here knowing all that history.
Yeah, that's why I say it's,
yeah.
And I mean, it's almost like whatever you're into historical wise, being at that landmark. It was almost surreal to think about all the people in my family that have done what they've done as far as cooking whole hog barbecue.
Right.
I've been fortunate enough to carry it to crowds all over America, but it started in that hole in the ground in that building.
So just water and salt, like all the stuff we're doing with fancy barbecue rubs and salting overnight and all this, you don't do any of that?
No.
So the only flavor on here is salt and smoke?
And pig.
And pig. Today's video is brought to you by ThermoPro and their Lightning Instant Read Thermometer. This is the new favorite tool in my barbecue arsenal. So you see lots of folks talking about instant read thermometers that have high accuracy and are super fast, but you don't have to spend over $100 to get that kind of performance. This is a much less expensive thermometer. The Lightning comes in at about 80 bucks, but with the coupon code and the link that you see on screen, you can save 30% off of that price. So you're spending less than $60 to get an amazing thermometer that will read a temperature in less than a second. It's got a hold button so I can pull it off and not have to keep my hand over the fire the whole time. The display changes as I move so I can be right-handed, left-handed, taking temperatures from wherever. It's IP65 certified, which means that the grease and the water and all the other stuff and smoke around where we're cooking isn't gonna get in here and mess up the thermometer. It's got everything that you want in a high-end instant read thermometer, except for not having the high price. It's even got a super strong magnet, stronger than any of the other magnetic instant read thermometers. That means it's gonna get stuck to my cookers and my refrigerator in my kitchen, and I'm gonna use this all over the place. I'm really gonna enjoy mine at home. I hope you enjoy yours too. Most of my cooking is in the offset world where I'm actually putting wood into the smoker. You don't do that with whole hog. With whole hog, everything is make the coals and then transport the coals.
Yeah, and I guess the easiest way to describe that, what you're talking about, is a horizontal draft and cook,
right?
Where this is straight vertical. And so what we're using, it's still not active wood. We're burning it down to coals where it's a lot more easy to manage because literally you're talking this far from the product you're cooking, anywhere from 30 to 36 inches. And so you can't manage an active fire.
Right.
With a 185 or 200 pound animal 34 inches above it.
I can see how that would be a lot more of a challenge. I've got the luxury of a firebox when I'm cooking offset, right?
Well, I mean, both of it. So what I have learned too is you can't cook brisket worth of dern this way, and you can't cook whole hogs worth of dern the other way.
Sam's grandfather, Pete Jones, grew up during the Depression. As America began its recovery from World War II, Pete, then just a teenager, founded Skylight Inn, which unbeknownst to him would become the most widely covered North Carolina barbecue joint in existence. Have you heard stories about what drove Pete to decide to open up the restaurant?
I know that he was a teenager when he opened, and if I'm not mistaken, he was born in 29. And so you're talking about a 17, 18-year-old kid.
Uncle Emmett, John Bill's older brother, had a barbecue place called City Cafe where the barbershop is now. Daddy worked for him and started at about 6 or 7 years old. And when they got to be teenagers, in fact, Daddy was 19, Uncle Robert was 21 when they came out here. Daddy just told Uncle Emmett, he says, I'm gonna try it on my own and I'm gonna have the best barbecue in the area. And Uncle Emmett laughed at him and says, boy, you just a greenhorn, says, I've been in business longer than you are old. And Daddy says, well, we'll see.
And Skylight was built where it's built because that was the original family farm. And so the land was free. And incidentally, it was the main highway at the time that carried you from Greenville to Kinston.
Over here next door where you see the building that's the shop now, behind it used to be a airstrip for Cessna planes, stuff like that. And my dad's sister's husband was flying over one day as they were building the building and they hadn't put the tent on yet. And when he put the plane down, he came in and told my dad, he said, flying over, he says, it looked like a skylight through there. And so they adopted the name Skylight Inn. And I told him, I said, for a barbecue place, you could have picked a whole lot of names better than that one. So this guy comes through about 1979, and he said he's from National Geographic. He says, we're going to do a survey on barbecue, and the one that we feel like has the best barbecue in the nation, we're going to feature in an article called Backroads America, the book,
And my grandfather was either a really good salesman or a little too proud, and basically told the guy to stop the inn. It was like, I mean, if you're looking for good barbecue, there ain't nowhere else to go. You made your last stop.
The guy came back about 2 years later and says, we picked you as the barbecue king. You're going to be featured as the article. So I told Daddy, I says, now, since you're the barbecue king, you ought to make this the barbecue capital. And so you seen the picture of the small building in there. So when Daddy wanted to build around and the contractor said, I can push your old building down, build what you want a lot cheaper, And Daddy said, I started in this building, I'll die in this building. And so Daddy had him to build around it and then put the dome on top that say we're the barbecue capital.
So like Skylight Inn, you know, was always one of those places that you just knew growing up here, but we didn't refer to it as Skylight Inn. It was, you know, Pete Jones BBQ. So like we're gonna go to Pete Jones, or we're gonna get something from Pete Jones, you know.
Somebody asked me, says, when did it become the Skylight Inn? Says, I always knew it as Pete Jones's. And I said, well, more folks knew it as Pete Jones's than they did the Skylight Inn. I said, but after Dad died, Samuel Warner said, when Pete died, Pete Jones BBQ died. Said, it's Skylight Inn there. And so I said, but as long as I'm alive, it's still gonna be Pete Jones.
He was super intelligent, but he could not read or write. He come from that generation of having to basically stop school with a third grade or less education. But I think it caused him to want to be the smartest man in the room, especially after he garnered some success. But if that meant withholding information from you to do so, that's what he did. And that is not a good succession plan.
I could never satisfy my daddy, and I'm not picking. Samuel could never satisfy me. It just, as Samuel said, it's not the 100 things you do right, it's that one thing you do wrong. You hear it over and over and over, and that's pretty much the Jones philosophy.
Pete Jones had no idea at the time that he'd be creating a legacy that would stand the test of time. In fact, right up until the very end of his life, Pete and everyone else figured the restaurant would die with him.
Before he got sick, he said, when I die, y'all will be closed in 6 months.
I don't know how many times we were working in there, and you know, several of us family, and he made the comment, hey, if something were to happen to me, this place will close in 6 months.
There was always maybe somebody who wasn't part of the family that was doing cornbread or in the kitchen, but there was always generally kind of family up front, to my knowledge. And so we were kind of that first entry of a new staff that wasn't family, that was kind of being front facing into business. I hate it, but like when you were serving people at a counter, I often had this emotion of like feeling insignificant, right? Like beneath people because of that occupation and what I was doing. I wish I had experience in the pits and at least learning or hearing his theory, you know, because growing up, we weren't in the smokehouse unless we were running out there to get a piece of meat. And that kind of put my mind in the place that this is not my forever thing. Like I've got to move, I got to do something bigger. Like this isn't a respectable career.
When I told my dad that I wanted to be a preacher and a cowboy when I grew up, my dad said, I got no problem with the cowboy part, but we don't need any preachers. I hated this place growing up. And so when I was going off to college, which I knew the Lord had called me to be a preacher, but I'd have done anything except prime tobacco to get out of the barbecue place. I hated it. Samuel came to work when he was about 11 years old. He hated it just as bad as I did. I mean, he wanted, well, I told all three of mine, you're going to work somewhere. And so since I'd started here and Samuel was my son, I felt like maybe he'll want to carry on the legacy. If not, he'll at least still, like my dad said, I'm gonna send you to college. If you don't make it, you'll have something to fall back on anyway.
And I actually went to work with another guy you grew up calling Uncle, but he was a former partner of my dad's in a gun shop. I went to work with him for 3 or 4 years.
Decades apart, college apparently had a profound effect on the Jones men. It was there that both decided they really did want to be part of this barbecue phenomenon. In Sam's case, it was just in time.
The community college I was going to had the chance to write an English literature paper basically on whatever you want to write it on.
He had to write a term paper, and the teacher said, Samuel said, on what? She said, anything.
I thought, man, I'll do it on barbecue.
Okay.
Mainly in an effort to not use a lot of effort. You know, it's like, hey, I'll breeze through this 10 or 15 pages.
Right.
And so Samuel picked the barbecue business, and once Samuel started researching the barbecue business, it turned him around like it did me, and that's when he came back and said, Pa, can I have my job back?
That was probably the pendulum that swung, that I looked at it as a job my entire life. I always likened it to taking off like a younger, immature set of spectacles and putting on somebody's with a little more wisdom. It's like on The Wizard of Oz when it goes to black and white, the color.
Right.
You know, it's like, whoa. It's that almost that light bulb moment.
Right.
And when I went to school, like I said, taking North Carolina history class, learning about the area, some of the old stuff. There was a corn mill over in Kinston called Lakeside Mills. And the foundation of that mill dated back to the Revolutionary War. That's where we buy our cornmeal for the barbecue place. And so when I came home telling my dad about that, Daddy said, well, we can trace our roots back to the 1800s. Daddy was carrying me back down the family tree as the ones who'd been in the barbecue business and where it'd been located around town. And all of a sudden I looked at the barbecue business as being a family tradition rather than a job, and I kind of fell in love with it then, wanted to carry on the tradition.
When my grandfather's health broke, and that was really an overnight situation, and it was on a Sunday, I wasn't feeling well, had went to the doctor, and I went in with like a sinus infection or something. And while I'm sitting there, my aunt comes walking in, my dad's sister, with my granddad, he's having chest pain. They take him to the back, and I mean, literally called an ambulance right then. So I called my mom. They were just getting out of church and was like, hey, you need to meet me at the hospital. You know, oh boy, he ain't doing well. And so my dad and I are standing in the emergency room. They're getting ready to carry him for his heart cath. And he goes, you know, until I get back on my feet, I want Samuel to take care of X, Y, and Z. I don't know if it was much of a decision, to be honest with you. It was almost like this is what has to take place. And he was if I liken him to a mafia boss. We agreed that I would lay out a semester to go back into the store in our family. We got in a bad situation, to be honest with you, where we probably couldn't have stood for me to not be there, nor did we have the walking around money to send me. So I never went back and finished.
So Sam's college career ended early. And sadly, Pete Jones never came out the same man from his heart condition. Young Sam took over at Skylight, but things just seemed to get worse.
My longtime girlfriend at the time, our families had known each other for years and years, and they thought she just walked on water. And then August of '05, she and I were on the way to church, at my dad's church. Got struck by a car in the intersection, threw us both out of the car, and it killed her.
When Samuel's girlfriend got killed in the wreck, Samuel had been with a singing group for a while, and I always picked on Samuel about, I've heard everybody else in the group give a testimony, but I've never heard you give one. And Samuel said, when the Lord tells me to give one, I'll give one. Well, after the girl got killed in the wreck, it broke his heart. It broke all of our heart. Samuel asked the group if he could give the invitation at the close of the service. And I bet you I had a dozen preachers to call me from places that the group sang when Samuel would give the invitation. Says, when your boy gave the invitation, said there was very few folks left in the seat. Says everybody was at the altar with tears in their eyes.
And so she got killed August 14th of '05. My grandmother Jones passed December the 14th of '05. And my grandfather lived 61 days. He died February 15th of '06. And you know, so in a 6-month stretch, I remember when we buried him, I looked at my dad and I said, you know, I don't believe I got any tears left to cry. I said, I feel like for 6 months we've lived in the hospital and a funeral home. And you know, couple that with a continuing decline in sales. And then when he passed, you know, it was in the newspapers. I don't remember exactly what the headline was, but it was like, legendary barbecue man dead at 77. And I mean, it was just like pouring water on that barrel. And you know, the sentiment went from, how's your grandfather doing? How's Mr. Jones doing? Let him know we're thinking about him, praying for him. Then when he died, the sentiment was, barbecue ain't the same since Pete died.
When Daddy died, oh man, everywhere you went, here in the store, you could hear people whispering at the table. Folks were saying barbecue don't taste the same since Pete died, but Pete hadn't cooked a pig the last 5 years of his life before he died. And if our building hadn't been paid for, business dropped off to where we'd have had to close.
Perception is reality, and it had a devastating impact.
Sam, Bruce, and Sam's Uncle Jeff found themselves with this treasured legacy on their hands, but had to fight to keep it going. Through hard work and perseverance, They turned things around well enough that when opportunity finally knocked a few years later, they were able to answer the door.
Southern Foodways Alliance reached out and wanted to shoot a documentary film on us. Being in the media was foreign to us at that point. And so the gentleman that was tasked with doing these films, and he came and spent the better part of 3 days with us. And there again, didn't think a whole lot about it. He leaves, nice to meet you, appreciate it. And John T. Edge, who at the time was the director of the Southern Foodways Alliance, reached out and wanted me to do a, I guess you'd call it a film screening at Big Apple Barbecue Block Party. I remember walking around, you know, starstruck.
It's very different than down here.
Well, not only that, oh man, this is the biggest stage in barbecue. Because, you know, you can walk either direction in Madison Square Park for a block or two and eat your way across the country. And it's not me trying to cook you Texas barbecue. It's Salt Lick. And it's, you know, the real deal. It's Pat Martin from Nashville, Tennessee, Chris Lilly from Big Bob Gibson's in Decatur, Alabama. The heavy hitters. And then in the fall of that year, he reached out and said, look, we want to show that film at a SFA event in conjunction with Charleston Wine and Food. And it was like, we want to feature y'all's trio at Barbecue Slaw and Cornbread, and we got a crew of chefs that are going to build around it. You know, we're going to sell tickets, yada yada. I wasn't planning on going because they wanted me to cook there. Well, nobody in my family had ever cooked away from the restaurant.
Right.
And so since they didn't do it, I knew good and well I can't do it. And so I didn't write the dates down, nothing. I was like, yeah, I can probably do that. You know, and somebody from the festival reached out about accommodations or whatever, and I was like, ooh, I did agree to do that, didn't I? And Nick Pahakas of Jim and Nick's at the time, when I tried to get out of the event, he called the restaurant one day. He's like, well, what exactly is the problem? You know, he's stuttering just a little bit. And I said, Mr. Pahakas, it's one thing for you to think I'm a fool with me staying in Ada, North Carolina. It's a completely different thing for me to drive to Charleston and prove you right. And he busted out laughing. You know, I mean, just pure belly laughing on the phone. He's like, I can promise you, you're not going to be made a fool of, or you're going to make a fool of yourself.
The date is X, which was 3 months away. And his comment to me was, I think my wife is going to have surgery that day. And I was like, you think your wife's going to have surgery 3 months from now on that exact day? So he said, let me think about it. And anyway, eventually I went up and visited with him, and he was at his family's business at the time. And, you know, we had a great visit, and I finally convinced him. He had told me that he had never cooked outside of that building. And so we convinced him to come down, and he killed it. It was great.
I was also raised, though, if you tell somebody you're going to do something, that's what you need to do.
Right.
And so, boy, you talk about scared to death. And I was so nervous. Pat Martin was the only person I knew that was going to be doing something with the festival and was there when I got there for our little meeting. I'm nervous. Everybody's got these ideas of what I should do, and I'm using one of Jim and Nick's rigs. And that's when I met Rodney Scott.
Okay.
He had been featured at the same dinner the year before.
Right.
And was in the exact same boat I was in. We actually come from very similar backgrounds. You know, don't think you're going to all of a sudden be the all-star of our family.
Right.
Not happening. And so finally I was like, here's what I'm going to do. Put this pig on at such and such. Rodney said, I'll meet you. He said, I know exactly where you're at.
So to hear his stories and how his grandfather started the business and his techniques of cooking and the way that they did the whole hog, and obviously we weren't doing whole hog at the time. And so to see that different technique and how he learned it from his grandfather and his father was extremely interesting to me.
And so I remember we cooked that pig, and the way they wanted to do it was show the film, and then we were going to bring it in on a pan or whatever. Man, these people stood at their feet and clapped their hands, and I was like, we've been doing this a long time to no applause. You know, it was just like I was in a foreign country or something.
And just like that, this kid from Ayden, North Carolina graduated from being a local hero to being the global ambassador for Eastern North Carolina barbecue. Walking side by side with his heroes, Sam started doing more and more of these events, spreading the gospel of North Carolina barbecue. And the name Sam Jones started to be as important on the global stage as the name Pete Jones had been on a local one.
So Samuel was traveling, and I think he just liked to have somebody to go with him, you know, just to have somebody there to lend a helping hand, but to have some company too. And so there would just be these offers kind of out there, hey, would you like to come to this or be a part of this? And he had just been on Barbecue Pitmasters. So after that had aired and kind of done its thing, one of the other restaurants organized this benefit for some animal organization, and we came and we cooked a pig. So mind you, I'd never prior to this gone out of town and physically cooked. I've gone and served a catering, but there was never a cooking component, and I've never really been around it. We went to Raleigh, we set up in a parking lot, the other guys came, and we just sat around the burn barrel and we were feeding the fire and we were having a couple of drinks, and it was just fun, you know? And so then the next day, you know, this pig that we had just worked cooking, and by means I was observant and lending a hand, right? Like I wasn't truly cooking it, but I felt like I had a part in it. And then that day, you know, it transitioned to needing to chop that pig, which I felt very comfortable with. I'd done that a lot. And so we chopped this pig and we were serving it, and my family was there, and it was just like people were complimenting and just loving what we were doing. And it just felt good. Like I realized that I had taken for granted that job behind the counter being so insignificant, and now viewing it as a piece of North Carolina history and a family tradition that I got the privilege to help kind of carry on and be a part of. I just kind of went home on like a really emotional high. And so I reached out to Samuel and I was like, hey man, like if there's a way I can make, if I can just make a career out of working here, if I can, you know, do my thing, I would love to come back and be back a part of this business. And there really wasn't a spot.
With Sam's growing fame and growing family, it started to feel like time to expand beyond Skylight and open his own place. Just like his grandfather Pete Jones did when he left his Uncle Emmett's restaurant to open the Skylight Inn. By now, Bruce and Jeff were thriving at Skylight again while Sam was away doing all these events. So with the encouragement of Nick Pahakis, a plan was hatched.
I saw something in him that I knew that he was special, and I think that he was not only trying to continue the family tradition, but also becoming his own person. And I knew that Sam wanted to be able to prove to himself and prove to his father, his uncle, his grandfather that he could do this on his own. Be able to help him do that was a good feeling for me.
Being around those people where, you know, what I thought was impossible to them was just doing it in another town.
Right.
But Nick was the one that really invested a lot of time that he didn't have to, because he stood to gain nothing at all. And so the idea, when I say was born, and it was one of those deals of not only did he know how to do it, he was also that emotional pillow of saying, hey, like, this is possible and I can help you not screw it up.
I was questioning whether or not he was going to make it because I knew it was going to cost him a lot. I am not financially able to put Samuel in business. And you know, Samuel told me, he said, you were 50 years old when Pa died and you didn't know whether you were going to have anything or not. He says, and you had 3 children. He said, I got 2.
At this point, it was pretty much just, you know, I'm going to do this. He goes, man, you know you're going to have a partner. He said, you know, you're going to have somebody that's got your back to where when you're out doing this Sam Jones thing can cover home plate. And okay. Michael was the first person I thought about, even though at the time he wasn't even working with us.
One day Samuel called me up. It's like, hey, when you get off work, stop by the restaurant. I like, you know, run something by you. And so we came by, and if I remember correctly, it was like, hey, I'm thinking about opening my own restaurant. If I did that, would you consider like coming and working there? And it was like, absolutely. But then it was like, hey, would you like to, I've been kind of advised that I need to have somebody that, you know, boots on the ground, that's got some skin in the game to like keep everything on track. And I wouldn't feel right if I didn't offer it to you first. And I was appreciative, excited, but also intimidated because I didn't know what that meant financially. I mean, I was just starting out. I didn't have a whole lot other than a house to live in.
And he goes, I ain't got no money. You know, he's like, by the time I pay my student loans and my house payment and this, you know, his wife was in nursing school at the time. And he said, I put a little beer in the refrigerator. You know, that's about it.
He said, well, don't worry about that. You know, we'll make that work. Then I'll never forget, we were setting up at the Farmville Dogwood Festival. And he said, hey, we've got to go to the bank and sign some paperwork and stuff. And I was like, well, I got to sign it too. And my fear wasn't signing the paperwork. It was being significant enough to sign the paperwork, you know, because in fact, in that moment, I was not the best option. I had no real experience. I had no financial means if stuff went south. There was a big risk taken on me. I feel like that if I had to enter his mind of why, you know, I've been there. I've always been committed. I always worked really hard. I always stepped up for the extra and just made stuff happen.
You do have everything that you can't borrow or learn.
Right.
You know, which is you don't mind working, you're loyal, honest. Those are things that can't be taught.
Right.
It's either inherent to you or it's not. And I said the rest of it, hopefully we'll figure out.
We had, you know, improved some systems and stuff around Skylight and created some efficiency. So I think that the ability, given the opportunity, was demonstrated, but there should have been a hiring ad put out for like a operating partner for a restaurant, and somebody with experience should have come in and been me. 100%. I feel like that ultimately it was a good decision because in my personality and in my like character, like I'm gonna do it. You set me a goal, I'm gonna pass it, and I'm just gonna work really damn hard.
I didn't want to use Sam Jones. I didn't want to use my name.
You know, it brings a personal touch to the business and credibility. And since Sam's family had been doing this for so many years, it had to have its own identity, and people want to be recognized. And so if you go into Sam Jones BBQ, who are you going to look for? Sam Jones, right? And so to launch that, it had to be his place.
For some reason, just small-minded again, but I didn't want it to be like my grandfather where it was like, I'm the star of the show. But Nick, you know, just stayed on me about, you need to work with a branding company. You know, this is more than putting a sign by the highway. You know, you're trying to build something greater. All that time was the bank's not wanting to lend us no money.
Okay.
You know, because regardless of what the history was at Skylight, financially and on paper, this is a new venture. And so, you know, to them, brand equity, my name meant nothing. It brought nothing to the table, even though we were banking on the fact that it did. And so that was very disheartening. And you know, some of those guys and ladies just, I guess for whatever reason, whether they intended to or not, would speak to you, you know, so condescendingly, you know, which sucks. It's one thing to eat a piece of humble pie. It's a different thing to have to choke on it because somebody's cramming it in your mouth.
Property was purchased in fall of 14 maybe, and it was so much of a learning curve.
It's really hard to create something out of a vision to represent something that you want it to be authentic, feeling and telling the story, not something that looks like every other restaurant.
Several setbacks with the architect that were not pleasant, to the point of essentially having to get a divorce without having a concrete set 100% plan. And this had gone on for quite a while. I mean, the bidding process, if you want to call it that, had gone out 2 times, and time got wasted. You know, people looked at us like we were the buffoons, you know, like country's trying to come to town type of deal, even though Greenville's not that big of a town. And so a bunch of time got wasted. And I say wasted, I think we were looking to open like January, February at one point, then May, and literally the date we had set with the architect, when that date got there, we didn't even have a contractor. I mean, just to put it in perspective, how far behind on the timeline set forth was. And we ended up opening November.
Almost a year after the original date. Finally, opening day arrived, and the cavalry rode into town to help. And it's a good thing they were there, too.
You know, here's the thing about building a restaurant from the ground up. People are watching every day, and if it takes 9 months, that's 9 months of anticipation. And I think that restaurant's only like 10 miles from the original restaurants, so that's a small area, and everybody knows that family and knows Sam Jones. So the anticipation just kept building and building, and it's hard to hold back the excitement. And so people were lined up around the door, around the building, and we try to do a soft opening, we call it, but it's hard to do a soft opening when, again, people are watching this thing come together, and the floodgates open.
So we had a lot of people that helped us. I mean, literally, the parking lot was full. There's like 25 cars sitting in the drive-through, which was super. When I say it was a relief, like, hey, people are ready for us to be here. And we didn't make a lot of, when I say fanfare, it wasn't like we sent out press releases and stuff like that.
That team never had been through official training. And we had an addition of a drive-through, which Sam had never worked before, nor Michael. So there was a lot of moving parts. And I had my daughter up there, I had my son up there. The technology side of it was new. Everything, all the pieces to the puzzle were all new to everybody there.
So I remember, the first day, like the whole process of training was like imposter syndrome, right? It's like you're standing up there, and so it's like you don't know what, like the buzzer's about to go off and you don't know what the hell's gonna happen. And I remember we went into our storage room, me and Samuel, and I was like crying, and the tears were like fear and excitement. It was just emotionally overwhelming. We said a prayer, and I remember walking out to the sign out front and taking a picture together. I mean, there was already a line forming, and it was a pretty cool moment. It was probably one of the most intimidating moments.
And boy, you talk about, I ain't gonna use the language in case my mama sees this, but pooping the bed. I mean, it was that, when I say that bad, it was, we had hired a staff for a certain sales figure, and we weren't competent, didn't have enough people at the time, which was a double whammy. And it wasn't so much about selling the food too, as I likened it that day to a trailer that was improperly loaded. If your weight's not centered, it shakes terribly until it slows down.
There was so damn much going on that you just couldn't. You had me and Samuel who knew what we wanted it to look like, and because in that time, you had a couple of people doing each position just to try to, your half-ass training and trying to function, and there were so many things going on, you just couldn't manage it all. So then in that moment, each person made decisions on their own, and some of those decisions snowball into being the process, and none of it was like in a bad way. Like it's like we were serving like crap, but it was chaos.
The floodgates opened, and it was a shit show, and so everybody did everything they could to handle it.
We opened at 11, and at about 2:30 or so, Nick came to me, he goes, "You need to shut this down." We closed at like 3:30 or something like that, and basically like put somebody on the porch saying, "We're gonna reopen at 5, or basically for dinner. And so we shut everything down, got the staff together in the front, and basically like, let's have a little motivational talk here.
1,000 things going on, and trying to open up this restaurant. Everything was absolutely going against who Sam Jones was. It was like, it's not perfect. It's not going right. And so he was following, we call it the Philippine fall apart. And we just had to stop him and say, take a breath. We're going to lock the doors. We're going to regroup. We're going to get our food prepped up properly. And then we're going to have a new shift. There's 14 meal periods in a week. You got to get your shit together. And they did.
And so we reopened it. Dinner went much better than lunch. And so, but we were fortunate that we opened up financially way ahead of what we were shooting for. And so the good Lord blessed us in that regard, that at least our problem was too much business, not standing there listening to the crickets rub their little feet together.
Right. So opening day, while incredibly challenging, wasn't a complete disaster. Of course, that doesn't mean life got easy for our heroes. Running a restaurant has a lot of challenges most of us couldn't overcome without help.
At that time, we were working the full shifts, like the whole day. So when you just get your ass kicked for 10 or 12 hours, somebody's got to do the office work. Like, it's got to get done. There's no not doing it. So that was the most challenging part, because it was just so much. It was so overwhelming. It started to become like, if this is reality, if this is what running a restaurant is like, this isn't sustainable, you know? But running a restaurant in general is not like fun. Like, there's moments of pride, but it's challenging, and the people are evolving, and it's just, you start having a passion for barbecue and wanting to have a restaurant that helps display and demonstrate this tradition, and it don't take long for the operational side of the business to suck every bit of it out of you.
I know Michael and I went through when I say emotional roller coaster, you know, especially I know you wake up one day thinking, you know, we're going to just nail it. And then the next day you wake up, or 2 days later, going, what in the world have I done?
Business-wise, but what a beat down it is when you got your whole life savings on the line and you think you failed, which he didn't fail.
Just wagered everything. If this don't work, you know, I'm going to be living in a old Airstream down by the creek or something with no air conditioning, which is sobering. But at the same time, you don't want to share that with especially your family. You want to scare the hell out of everybody. And so we had a gentleman, one of those that helped us in the early days, come back in after he had moved on and basically helped us, when I say refocus. That again was not pleasant for especially the management staff, because you got somebody holding your feet to the fire, so to speak.
I mean, it was awful. It was painful. I dreaded every time he came into town, because it was somebody picking apart something that you worked so hard, and every time you made a concession or let something slip a little bit, it was not out of just saying I don't care. It was just out of pure, like, I don't want to have to handle that too right now. And then these things, you know, make their own concessions. But once we started getting those goals, like, you should be here, and you know, he would tell me numbers that I thought were just completely unrealistic from sales, and you know, y'all have the potential to be doing this or that. And man, it wasn't fun, but we put our heads down. It was hard, and it took a whole lot of work. So we had people in our company that just worked really hard, and they took over responsibilities. And so it just took time for these different components of the whole big picture to get a person, and to get a person who was competently doing it every day. And then it started them doing it and not me doing it, but with a lot of questions, a lot of phone calls, a lot of follow-up. And in 7 years, we doubled the revenue of the company that it started out. But it was that step of giving confidence to say, hey, you are doing it right.
As with all epic journeys, our heroes have fought off disaster and started to see some success. They've even opened a new location in Raleigh, and they pulled off what few in the restaurant industry ever achieve: balance and the freedom to lead that allows Michael to manage his managers and Sam to continue spreading the gospel of Eastern North Carolina barbecue without having to worry about the day-to-day survival of the restaurants.
It's probably a good problem that we've created an environment, and probably more so him than I, that sometimes you feel like you ain't needed. You know, which is good, because in those early days, man, we were pulling like 80 hours a week. You know, if he wants to take his boy on his boat out on the river fishing or whatever, it's not a huge deal.
It's not worrying about, you know, the mac and cheese recipe. It's worrying about the mental well-being or the satisfaction of this key component in this key player in your business. And are they happy? Am I doing enough for them? Do they have what they need for us to succeed and to be retained? That is the big weight that is carried today. But, you know, when you talk about quality of life, well, now we've got 2 restaurants that have tenured employees and tenured management. So it is easier to have some freedoms.
I believe it was last week was our biggest week we've ever had at that store. But I personally can take no credit for that, nor can nobody single-handedly. And so, yeah, I mean, that's a very, when I say a proud moment, and I spoke to one of them just Friday or Saturday night. I was like, man, that's something you ought to be proud of. You know, nobody can single-handedly take responsibility for it. You know, you win as a team, you lose as a team.
And if we're running short on something, we can call over to Sam Jones and they'll send us what we need. And we ran out of barbecue one day early, and I ordered about a half a pig from Sam, and they brought it over, and we chopped it up with serving it. And a guy was eating with us, and when he got through eating, he walked up to the counter and he says, ate with your boy yesterday, but yours tastes better than his. And I'm thinking, you just ate my boys again, you know. Like I said, that's why a lot of stuff is psychological. You know, when Pete died, it don't taste the same. Now all of a sudden mine tastes better than Samuel's, but he's eating Samuel's barbecue.
Finally, our hog is done cooking, and we bring it over to the Skylight Inn where it all started, where Sam jumps in, grabs the cleavers, and chops the barbecue himself, adding their signature Texas Pete hot sauce and apple cider vinegar, and making each of us a tray of North Carolina barbecue, cornbread, and sides. We told stories, we reminisced, we enjoyed some world-class barbecue.
When he expanded, he could have taken shortcuts, but he didn't. He's doing it the same way it's done at Skylight. And in some respects, in the barbecue world, he's the guy with the cape trying to defend what barbecue in North Carolina is and should be.
When you lay into that barbecue, the way it's cooked, you'll find out real quick he does the best he can with what can he's got. And I'm telling you, it's delicious. You know, when you look at a group of people, you can spot them, the ones that are willing to step up to the plate and get it done, get it accomplished, not going to stop until I'm finished with it. Samuel's one of those people.
I think people are true to North Carolina barbecue. Like I said, once again, everybody's taste buds are not the same. And just like here in Pitt County, you may not like mine, but there's several other barbecue places around that I'm sure one of them is going to fit your taste bud. Now, you know, they built the hospital close to the rest of them so you can have your taste buds worked on in case, you know, you don't like ours.
If I was to fall over in this chair dead, that restaurant's gonna keep going, is my hope. Yeah, I'm sure there'll be some conversation about Sam Jones passed away today, but it's my hope that would not affect Sam Jones barbecue like it affected the Skylight when my grandfather passed.